And hello, welcome to Therapy for Nerds. I'm Cassidy Russell along with,
Abbey Ronquillo and
Busse.
and this week we read the book by Carrie Fisher, The Princess Diarist. Okay, I keep wanting to say Princess Diaries, but it's a totally different book and movie franchise. So I grew up with Carrie Fisher because I grew up watching the original Star Wars all the time. I at one point was able to recite all the lines as they were being said. I think I was like 5 years old at the time. I was obsessed. And I loved Princess Leia specifically. I think having that kind of a female character just to watch was amazing for me growing up. But wanted to talk to Abby and Katie about their thoughts on the book and maybe if they have experience with the fandom at all.
Well, I thought it was a very interesting snapshot from her perspective and hearing her experiences with the filming and really just how the movies impacted her through the course of her entire life. Like that I think was surprising. Like it made sense, but it was also very surprising because it was such a fundamental change that she had to learn to adjust to throughout her life. And I don't know. I thought it was a very interesting read, like hearing her perspective, hearing the experiences. I think there was a lot to unpack with it.
yeah, and it's interesting too, especially because Carrie Fisher, if not everyone knows, she came from kind of like a famous family. Her mom was an actress, and her dad was also someone who was famous. So her, the book really touches upon her. It's a memoir, so in her own words, she's describing how you know, growing up in the spotlight comparatively to like the Star Wars franchise and how it grew was completely different and something that she was not prepared for.
Yeah. I mean, you would think that it would be at least some similarities between having these really famous parents because Debbie Reynolds was huge. And I forget her dad's name, something Fisher, but he was also really big and popular at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So you would think that there would be some comparability to that, but I think Star Wars just went to a level that had never happened before. Yeah, I mean, I think there you can make some comparisons to other big franchises like Harry Potter or maybe Lord of the Rings, but I just don't know if there's ever been and will ever be anything as major as Star Wars.
Yeah. I think there was also a degree of it was, in a sense, it was the first of its kind in that way, because I think the way that Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings have had a kind of a similar outcome, that's because we'd already seen it before. Like that could be expected a little bit more. And I can imagine for her, and I think she had mentioned this a lot throughout the book, is she didn't know what she was signing up for. Like she had no idea what to expect, because really, how would she have been able to know what this was going to turn into?
Yeah, and I don't think anybody really knew, how big Star Wars was going to get. I mean, at the time, other fandoms I don't think rose even prior to the next sets of movies coming out, just the first three, the original trilogy. I don't think there was anything like that at the time or even prior to it.
Well, I mean, the first fandom that in modern history was really the Star Trek fandom.
Yeah.
Um, I think Star Wars, the fandom itself, took a lot from the Star Trek fandom and getting mailing lists set up and conventions set up and all that kind of stuff. So I think there was a little bit of a framework with Star Trek, but Star Trek was such a niche thing. Whereas Star Wars had such a widespread popularity that just grew like a wildfire and it continues to grow and evolve to this day. And to have your personal identity so interlinked with this character that you played, I know that happens for actors sometimes, but this just seems like it was a whole nother level.
Yeah, well, I think there's also the piece of a lot of times actors get put into a role type like they're always the bad guy, they're always the good guy. Like there's like a role type, but I don't, that's not always the case where it's not a specific character. But I think that was what was so different, is like that character defined who they were. It wasn't just like a role. Like they weren't just like a princess role. It's like you're this specific person.
And she talks about that a lot, about how like how can she untangle herself from Princess Leia, if she even can at this point. The two names are like interconnected, interlinked, and there's really no tearing them apart at this point. I mean, I think the only actor that comes to mind that is that interlinked is like Robert Downey Jr. and Tony Stark. Is there really a difference between those two? No.
Yeah, so true. And I think, yeah, I think Carrie Fisher in the book, she really tries to identify this role of like, she didn't know what she was getting herself into when, you know, starting the Star Wars franchise, but at some point, whether she liked it or not, she just had to accept that this is who she was, that she was Princess Leia, and that that's what she will forever be known by. And there were a lot of I mean, along with the good things that came with her fame and this role, were a lot of negative things as well that kind of impacted her mental health. So it was an interesting, I think, you know, seeing both aspects of like the good and the bad. And typically, I don't think we hear a lot of, you know, celebrities openly talk about negative aspects of stardom.
Yeah, and I think that's true, because I think we get very limited snapshots a lot of times into the lives of other people, especially, you know, even though it's people who maybe feel like their lives are very publicly available to us, we don't really fully understand. And I think that brought so much to the table of her being able to really talk about the experience she had with that, and how it really was redefining for her life. And, you know, there was a lot of positive aspects, but there was a lot of challenges with having really been put into position to assume an identity that you didn't intend to take, and how she learned to manage it, how she learned to cope with this when it was something that was unexpected, that wasn't anticipated, that wasn't able to be prepared for.
Yeah, because she talks about how she was excited to play this princess role, and how it wasn't like the roles that she'd played in the past, and how, but I don't know if, like, if you were to go back in time and tell her exactly what would have happened, I don't know if she would have signed up for it. I don't know if any of the Star Wars cast would have signed up for it, because it's a lifelong, it ended up being a lifelong commitment when they only signed on for like a couple of movies.
Yeah, and it's also interesting because I think that a lot of times in life we do make decisions that have a long-standing impact on us, but so oftentimes we don't know when we are signing up for things, like on a more global scale, like signing up for something that's going to impact the rest of our life. And it really makes you kind of pause and think about, like, how do my actions really impact me in the future? Like, what are the outcomes of things that I never could have anticipated? And obviously you can't anticipate, and that's kind of the point, but it really does lead to the question of like, how is what I'm doing now going to affect me later?
I think it's really hard to say because, you know, you can, you know, look, any of us can look back into our lives and be like, oh, you know, I really wish I would have made this change, or, you know, not do this the way that I did. But who knows how that would have impacted everything else that had transpired after it. You know, she could have potentially, you know, if there was some type of crystal magic ball telling her this is what your life's going to be like after you produce this movie, or you're part of it. I think it's so hard to imagine. Like, you can tell yourself, yeah, that sounds really great, and then not realize what the consequences could be. Or you could say, oh, that sounds really terrible, and then also not know what the consequences would be of not, you know, partaking in it. I don't know if I'm making sense.
Because it's like, even if she were to be told like, oh yeah, there'll be crazy fans coming up to you telling how they masturbated to you for decades to come, I don't even know if you can conceptualize that, because it hadn't really happened yet. So I don't know, probably wouldn't even believe you. But then there's also all of these positives that can come out of it. And like what I got the sense, and I could be wrong, but when I was listening, because I listened to the audiobook, which she narrates, and oh boy, I think it's fantastic. And you can get it through your local library if you live in the United States. I highly recommend it. So it really sounded like I got the sense that she enjoyed playing the character. She really enjoyed playing Princess Leia. And she liked having that like feisty attitude that hadn't really been seen too much. Like she wasn't just waiting for these guys to come save her, she was actively doing things at the time, which really we hadn't seen too much of when this movie was first made, which is something that she really enjoyed and really loved bringing to the table, and seeing how many like girls felt really empowered after watching it. So you can definitely tell like she got a lot of joy out of that part. But then there comes like these really weird other things that you don't really think of or expect people to say to you.